In the middle.
Concerning the Taliban specifically, I'm interested in what you would think about whether, well, from what I was understanding, the way you spoke of it, it was sort of the Taliban, a black and white situation of we need to find ways to stop the Taliban through population, preferably. But might it be possible to look at that as more of a cause and effect situation where think about reasons why the Taliban might have reasons to, like, why do they hate America to begin with? Mm-hmm. And are there aspects of U.S. foreign policy that are going to continue these cycles?
Yeah.
And how can we look at that?
How big do you want to get? I mean,
well, it seems like
if you're asking me to solve the Israeli-Palestinian conflict, I can't do that in the time allotted.
I'm not going
but
there. I'm trying to
I understand.
focus on why the Taliban hates us to begin with,
Yeah.
and whether we can address that.
Let me see if I can break it up a little bit, because I think the question you're asking is a good one. We have a need in Afghanistan. If you go into Afghanistan looking for enemies, you're going to find them. And there is a need in Afghanistan to look at those who are aligned against the Afghan government and see which can be reconcilable, which can't be reconcilable. At the end of the day, you're going to have a group of Taliban or Al-Qaeda. Unfortunately, there's a pretty strong divide between the Taliban and Al-Qaeda in 2001, even to 2002. The way we've mismanaged this war has led to a situation in which the Taliban and Al-Qaeda are more or less unified now. At the end of the day, we can wage the greatest counterinsurgency campaign known to man, and we're still going to have a certain degree of what we call unreconcilables or irreconcilables. They are going to be those who unfortunately, we will likely have to confront with force. Having said that, the vast majority of those who are fighting against the United States and our allies in Afghanistan and the Afghan state are probably reconcilable. They may be a dollar-a-day Taliban who can be bought off with jobs. They might be other Taliban who can be persuaded to shift over to the Afghan state. We can do a couple different things. We can increase Pashtun political representation in the government in Kabul. The composition of the government in Kabul matters as much with respect to the conflict as anything we do as a U.S. military force. But the one word of caution that I'll give there is that, again, when you talk about creating a political settlement, you have to talk about creating the conditions for that settlement. I'm a pretty young guy, but for the past 10 years, I've either been fighting or studying insurgencies, from all over the place. And one book that's always struck me is Stathis Kalivis's The Logic of Violence and Civil War. Kalivis is a political scientist at Yale who did this marvelous survey of civil wars and insurgencies. And one of the conclusions that he arrived at is that we often think that in civil wars and insurgencies, loyalty is endogenous. That, you're a red because you're a red. But the reality is that loyalty is more or less exogenous, to where if you're in a blue-controlled territory, you're going to be a blue. And collaboration doesn't lead to control, but rather vice versa. So you can't go into an area and say, all right, we're just going to pay some folks off and get them back over to our side. That doesn't work. You have to establish control over an area, and that then in turn leads to collaboration, reintegration, and reconciliation. So I think we've got some way to go in establishing control over certain areas of Afghanistan. I say we, the vast majority of this is going to be done by our Afghan partners. And that is in turn going to lead to a degree of reconciliation. I do think that there are irreconcilables, though, that quite frankly are their goals are not limited to Afghanistan. And I don't think that even if we created a viable Palestinian state in the West Bank and Gaza tomorrow, it's not going to address their concerns. So, ma'am.
I was wondering about the role Blackwater or XE Services is playing right now in the war, and whether you have any reservations about the American government hiring them.
The role of contractors, yeah. Yeah, it's a problem, right? Because in a counterinsurgency conflict, you're requiring your forces on the ground to basically obey rules of engagement that are far more restrictive than those rules of engagement in a conventional campaign. Yet when you have for-profit contractors in a counterinsurgency environment, they're not being motivated by the greater higher good, they're being motivated by their bottom line. So if their contract calls for them to protect diplomats, well, who cares how many civilians they kill as long as they protect those diplomats? But from the perspective of the Afghans or the Iraqis, if you look at Z or Blackwater or whoever, they're just the Americans. You know, there's no difference between a Blackwater contractor and a US Marine. So yeah, it is an issue. Afghanistan's tried to do things differently from Iraq. You don't have these, they don't allow these massive contracts. So, but that's often led to a different problem, which is now you have tiny little contracting and private security corporations all over Afghanistan. To a degree, we, the United States, we made a decision based upon, I know it seems like we've got the largest military on earth, and that's because we do, but we've made a decision to outsource a lot of our engineering and a lot of our the non-combat things we need. I mean, we don't have soldiers deliver you chow at a chow hall. Those are contractors. We don't have soldiers do secondary maintenance on weapons system. Those are contractors. So we have outsourced a lot of stuff towards contractors, and for the most part, you know, we can't wage war, we can't do things abroad, even if we're, you know, in Kosovo and Bosnia. I mean, Camp Bondsteel, that was built by Brown and Root. To a degree, we are dependent upon expeditionary contracting, but there's a difference between expeditionary contracting and private security corporations. And especially with respect to private security corporations, their interests simply don't match up with our own in many cases. And it's a huge problem, and I don't think, and it's why when you construct contracts, when you drop the contracts for what they do on the ground, you have to be very, very careful. And you have to create incentives within those contracts for them to operate within your commander's intent. It's a nightmare, really. Sir.
I guess just speaking in terms of, American security, I guess I would actually like to broaden the question to the Israeli-Palestinian conflict, and I guess because I think it is probably at least one of the main factors in this. And I'm wondering, I think I do agree with you that we probably won't be able to get the Israelis and the Palestinians to, come together and have a good negotiation that, benefits both sides. So I think I read from Thomas Friedman in the New York Times that he proposed, that we just leave that area in general, and then for me that would even seem like it makes the United States much safer because we're not even there. And I actually don't want to go this deeply, but I guess part of my assumption is also like what was our purpose in going or creating Israel in the first place too, so.
Wow, okay.
I don't want to go.
I am absolutely sure that I don't want to debate the existence of the State of Israel today. You know, the one thing I would say, and I'll answer this briefly, because whenever you're talking about Israel and the Palestinian territories, you're really, you're in a minefield. So I'm going to dodge most of your question. And also because I'm not the pros pro on this. But having said that, we largely ignored Israeli and Palestinian concerns for 8 years during the Bush administration. Were we better off or worse off for having not been engaged in the peace process?